Good morning. So the book I chose for my Coretta Scott King Award winner is March, Book 3, written by John Lewis. It's an autobiography of John Lewis's involvement in events leading up to the March on Selma. It is the same John Lewis who became a congressman. Co-authored by Andrew Aiken, and it's a comic book and is illustrated by Nate Powell. Book 3, obviously, it's a trilogy, and this is the final part of the trilogy. Very, very powerful, tremendously interesting social studies book. So certainly I will go back and take a look at the other two. This would be a book I would purchase and possibly place in a classroom. Got to be a little careful for reasons I'll talk about here in just a little bit, with the violence and the language. Set towards the end of the modern civil rights movement, 1960s, like I said, culminating in the March on Selma and the Voting Rights Act. So most of the book is set in Mississippi and Alabama. There are scenes set in Washington, D.C. President Johnson plays a predominant role in the book. It's a autobiography, so Lewis used the words I was here, I went there. But there are also scenes that are depicted where Lewis was not present, such as it begins with the very infamous bombing of a church in Alabama that killed 4 young African American girls. And then other historical figures feature predominantly Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and Malcolm X. There's also the villains of the piece, so to speak. Obviously villains in real life, George Wallace, and then Sheriff Jim Clark. One of the coolest parts of the book that I found was there are chapters that show the inauguration of President Obama in 2009 and the presence of John Lewis as a congressman. Whether you believe in Obama's politics or not, it's still a major part of civil rights to show the first African-American president of the United States. One of the coolest scenes that's illustrated is when Obama gives Lewis a note, and you can see the note, and it says, "Thanks to you," which explains the role played by Lewis in the civil rights movement. The illustrations are all in black and white, except for the front cover, which is color. So the illustrations show the violence, and the facial features show the terror and the hatred. So for some, it might not be an easy book to read. So for example, you can see this bottom picture, with the sheriff's deputy attacking the protesters. And then you can see this is how the scenes of the March in Selma, I hope you can see that, are depicted, with the big words showing crack and thump of the batons hitting the protesters. And then the facial features, this is John Lewis looking at the violence. So these are figured predominantly throughout the book. They just show the civil rights movement wasn't nonviolent at all. I began the book going, man, this would be an awesome book for the classroom. And then as I began to read, I began to have some doubts, not from the historical perspective, but the N-word figures predominantly in the book. And then there's one case where the F-word is used in the book, which kind of surprised me. But of course, it's reality. So I would imagine you would have to get permission to have this book in the classroom today. But it would certainly be an awesome social studies book. It shows accurately how things worked out, and also goes into a lot of detail about the politics behind the Voting Rights Act and Civil Rights Act, and how President Johnson, got it done for political reasons, not necessarily because he supported it. So in that aspect, it would be for more mature students, but certainly could be very useful. Activities that would go through this book. Gosh, you could draw your own comic book on something that wasn't depicted in this book. Of course, I haven't read books 1 and 2, so the bus boycott came to mind. Maybe even go back to at the end of the Civil War, the amendments. Maybe a comic book from that time. When I was teaching, I had my kids do newspaper articles. So you could be a newspaper reporter at Selma, describe the events, eyewitness accounts, and such like. Conclusion, just a terrific book. Got to be careful whether or not it's now appropriate for students in the classroom due to some of the content. Thank you.